The Safe Route. Voices from the Border. A podcast of Safe Route Project. When Tariq steps off the train in Trieste, the sun has already set. The station is nearly empty, but just outside, he finds himself in a square that activists have renamed the Square of the World. Every evening, migrants and volunteers gather here, a meeting point that is also a battleground between hope and hardship. For many, the square is the first foothold in Europe after crossing the Balkan borders. For others, it is just a stopover before continuing the journey north. Tariq takes in the scene. Weary faces, outstretched hands. A nurse crouched down, tending to the torn feet of someone who crossed the border on foot. Others distribute food, clothing. The air buzzes with a symphony of different languages. Tariq understands why Square of the World is such a fitting name for this place. Explaining what happens here is Francesca Pisano, Program Manager at the Danish Refugee Council Italy, an international organization working along the country's northern borders.
What usually happens in Trieste is that migrants that have just crossed the border with Slovenia are finding themselves with no opportunity to finding some shelter in the city of Trieste. They usually gather in two specific parts of the city. One is a square in front of the train station where they can find volunteers as well as people working for local civil society organizations, providing them with some warm clothes, some food when needed, some medical support, as well as with some orientation on what are their rights for staying in the country or their rights for applying for asylum, and overall information on how to better navigate the system in Italy. The other place where people usually gather in the city of Trieste, it's called Silos. It's an abandoned place where many people that are with no whatsoever legal recognition of their status yet, they're either asylum seekers or people that have not been able yet to apply for an asylum claim, find shelter. But it's an informal settlement with very bad hygiene and sanitary conditions. But many volunteers are working there in trying to provide the best support possible to the people present there. What DRC is doing together with the partners there is mainly legal aid, cultural mediation, and overall support to the people on the move that are present in the city of Trieste. The nationalities that we find are the main nationalities that are usually crossing the Western Balkan route, including Pakistani migrants, which in some cases, once arrived in the city of Trieste, find ways to find a job, which is usually work exploitation because of the network of exploiters for those who are willing to stay in the country, of course. because there's also a high percentage of people that is just staying in the city of Trieste for a few days and then are willing to move onward with their journey, either to go to other European countries such as Germany, Austria, the United Kingdom, or France. Or some are trying to find a life and start a new life in Italy by filling out an asylum application, although the time for filling out an asylum application and for a formal recognition of the refugee status is extremely long in Italy, including finding a proper shelter in reception centers that are provided by the state but are quite full in the last months. And therefore, even though people are filing out an asylum application, it may take months for them to be accommodated in a state reception center, which creates a huge problem of destitution of people that have the right to stay in the country because they have applied for asylum, but can't be provided a proper accommodation and all the integration services, including language courses, legal aid support, medical support, access to documents and to social services present in the country. And these people are often in the position of filing an asylum application, but then being kind of obliged to leave the country and look for a better place to live in another European country because of the lack of support provided by the Italian state. What we do there with partners is trying to support the people on the move according to their specific needs. If some are already willing to move onward, what we try to do is to inform them on the risks of irregular migration within Europe, on the protection opportunities that they can find in the country of Italy, but also in other countries, and the places at the borders where they can find shelter and basic needs support, such as food, such as warm clothes. For those who are willing to stay, then our legal aid officers are supporting them in the access to documentation. But at the same time, you can imagine that it can be quite frustrating for a legal aid officer to provide as much information as possible on the possibility of staying in Italy, while at the same time, these people are not being provided with what the state is required to provide to them. First and foremost, a proper accommodation, which is creating the situation in Trieste, but also in other border areas where people are basically sleeping in the streets.
Not far away, Tariq hears someone speaking Urdu, his mother tongue. Drawn to those familiar words, he approaches and meets Ismail Swati, a Pakistani cultural mediator who has been working on the streets of Trieste for years. Ismail dedicates his time to helping newly arrived migrants navigate a reality that seems determined to work against them at every turn. At the moment, Ismail is trying to piece together what happened to a young Pakistani man who was just treated by a volunteer nurse. The story that unfolds is just one of the countless heavy, heart-wrenching accounts Ismail has heard during these years on Trieste streets.
I met last year this small kid from Afghanistan. So he was like 13 years of age. When he was 8 years, he departed from his country, and he spent like 5 years in Turkey and all the Balkan route. And now when he reached here, he was very active and too much intelligence. Like he has the knowledge of everything, every aspects of life. So while staying in a couple of hours, like with me, he, attracted all the gathering and took the money from everybody. And I saw he also robbed something from the driver because he launched himself to our truck. And then he met with the driver. The driver was sleeping, so he took some stuff from him, and he was like very energetic, very clever, and very. So I asked him how he learned this thing. He said that my father died when I never saw my father nor my mother. But when I decided to live with a group of my village people, so I had very bad experience, but I learned a lot of things from my journey. And yes, so it remained me very And also, like, there are thousands of stories. I met last year this Syrian family. The lady was pregnant. She was like almost delivering the baby, and we tried to help him. So he was, we helped them. It was a rainy day. We helped them, and the way she thanks us, it was not expressible in the words, because she telling me something in her eyes. We give them food, some medicines, some blankets, and so his face will always remember me in my one. And also last year there was also another Syrian family. They were a baby in Slovenia, and after the second day they were in the Trieste. And this baby was very, very, very cute, very beautiful. So there are some glimpses which remain always in your life. Also, like 2 months ago, there was a young man from Afghanistan. He departed after the Kabul fall, and with his young baby, and his wife was a doctor. So he said that she lost her life, and when she was 2 months old, I am taking care of him, and I brought up to here the boy, as a father, but acting like a mother. So he was also very, very active. There are thousands of stories if we start talking about. Like, I personally think that every person has a story, every person has sufferings, every person has a dark side.
Many in Piazza del Mondo mention the words "the game." Tariq has come to understand that this is what migrants call their journey through the Balkans. They call it a game, but it's a game that can cost you everything, explains Giulio Zeriali, a social worker with 10 years of experience in Trieste. He works for the Open Europe project of Diaconia Valdese, providing legal information and social support to people on the move who arrive in Trieste via the Balkan route. Whether they plan to continue their journey or stay and apply for asylum in the city.
The management of the Balkan route has been really violent for many years and is still going in this way. But what we can say is that for many years the Croatian border has been a huge wall for the people on the move. And we had an experience for many years of people who are trying to reach Europe, to reach, in our case, Trieste, who were forced to cross the Balkans from the northern border of Bosnia till the border of Trieste, walking for 15 or 20 days in the wood, in the bush, trying to avoid the Croatian and the Slovenian and the Italian police, risking to get pushed back. The pushback means that every policeman met on the road could be the finish of the game. The game is so called by the people on the move because actually it was like a game. So the people were leaving for their journey with a small backpack, crossing the mountains and trying to avoid the police and getting to the... It was like the Croatian police was the final boss, no? And so they had to cross that wall and arrive to Trieste to win the game. The point is that crossing that borders was very tough for them, and we had experience of people who tried to cross the borders for 15, 20 times, and every pushback were meaning like super violent repression by the Croatian police. It means that telephones were broken, the shoes were stolen, the women, children and men were beaten hardly by the police and put on some vans and brought back to the Bosnian border, where no accommodation system were welcoming them. It was a super tough period, and it ended more or less thanks to the huge effort of the network formed by the lawyers, activists, volunteers, politicians, journalists, reporters, psychologists, academics, researchers who fight for many years at all the levels It means on the borders, helping the people inside the country to help them to survive, and going to with advocacy actions in the courts and in the parliaments and in the European squares with a lot of political action. And at the end, in last 3 years, the pushback chain, because I said that every policeman on the Balkan route from Bosnia to Italy was involved in the pushback chain. It means that, for example, the Italian policeman caught a guy and his order was to bring him back to the Slovenian police, and the order to the Slovenian police was to take him and bring him to the Croatian police. The Croatian policeman had the order to beat them and humiliate him and send him to Bosnia with deep injuries and without anything in his hands or without clothes, and in a really frustrating situation.
Giulio's words are suddenly interrupted by a wave of tension between activists and volunteers gathered in a square. The news spreads quickly. Several activists were arrested in Bulgaria for requesting medical assistance for 8 people who had been walking for 3 days and had spent the night in the woods in 2 degrees Celsius without water or food. Can the price of solidarity, which showed its most beautiful side in Trieste, really be that high? Tariq feels a growing need to understand, to see these realities with his own eyes. The journey must continue. Next destination, Sofia.